The School of Cleveland Ballet is now accepting auditions for both their trainee and summer intensive programs. Their trainee program is open to male and female dancers ages 18 to 22 and offers opportunities to perform alongside Cleveland Ballet at their home in Playhouse Square and in productions during their regional tours across Northeast Ohio. Cleveland Ballet's home theater complex Playhouse Square is the largest performing arts complex outside of Lincoln Center. School of Cleveland Ballet's summer intensive program is open to dancers ages 8 through 22. The program runs for 4 weeks where dancers will participate in daily classes in ballet, pointe, conditioning, modern, jazz, character, Spanish dance, and more. As part of the program, there is housing, food, and transportation available, as well as workshops in nutrition, injury prevention, makeup, and more. Auditions for both programs are by video and do not include any audition fees. Audition by March 31st, 2022 for the trainee program and by March 16th, 2022 for the summer intensive. Visit clevelandballet.org for complete audition and program info or click the links in the description of this episode. We want to take a moment to direct your attention to a group of 15 dance brands who have come together to help raise funds for the Red Cross Ukraine Crisis Appeal through their raffle that is going on now. Raffle tickets start at just $2 and enter you to win over $600 worth of dance prizes. 100% of the proceeds are being donated to the Red Cross Ukraine Crisis Appeal. Entries close on March 18th, 2022 at midnight Eastern Standard Time. More information is available at dancespiration.store or click the link in the description of this episode. Before we get started with our episode, we wanted to remind you of a few ways that you can support and connect with the podcast. If you haven't already, don't forget to rate and review this podcast wherever you are listening. You don't even need to leave a review. You can just go in and give us a 5-star review. It really helps us continue the podcast growth and is greatly appreciated. Also, don't forget to connect with us on social media, Instagram and Facebook at Conversations on Dance and Twitter at Convo on Dance. Sign up for our email list to receive an email notification each time we release a new episode. Click the link in the description of this episode to sign up now. Now, let's get into COD. I'm Rebecca King Ferraro.
And I'm Michael Sean Breeden, and you're listening to Conversations on Dance. Today on Conversations on Dance, we are joined by Janet Eilber, the artistic director of the Martha Graham Dance Company, and Wild Up musical director Christopher Rountree. Janet and Christopher have been working together to revive and re-envision the choreographic works of 20th century giant Martha Graham and their accompanying musical compositions. They talk to us about their process in re-envisioning these works, how they attempt to inhabit the minds of the creative geniuses who bore them, and why these works are still relevant to audiences today. The Soraya Performing Arts venue in Los Angeles, California has been an integral part of these restoration projects and will be the first to present the latest project, The New Canticle for Comedians, a reimagined upgrade to a Graham work that was almost entirely lost. The premiere of New Canticle is this March 19th. If you are in the Los Angeles area, you can find tickets at thesoraya.org. So thank you both so much for joining us this afternoon. Janet, we've had the pleasure of talking to you before on our podcast, and Christopher, we're so eager to hear about the work you're doing right now with Janet. But before we get into that, can we just get a little bit of background from both of you, how you came upon your respective art form and what that looked like in terms of guiding you into professional career?
Janet, we'll start with you.
How I came upon dance?
Yes.
In my life. Captain Kangaroo, which you all probably don't remember as a children's show in the 50s, had a treasure house ballerina. And I just told my mom that's what I wanted to do and started once a week ballet lessons in Detroit, where I lived. And I went to the Interlochen Arts Academy. My parents were on the faculty there, where I got 4 hours of dance every day with my high school training. I went on to Juilliard. I was introduced to the Martha Graham style and technique at Juilliard, and from there went into Martha's company and just kept going.
I love this, the 2-minute abbreviation of Janet's entire life.
How about you, Christopher?
And for me, so I grew up in an ashram in Santa Monica, California, and I was chanting and meditating as a little kid. And so classical music was pretty out there for my entire family, but I started singing in choirs. in school. I played violin as a little kid and hated it because it hurt my neck. I was an aspiring pianist, and then I couldn't practice enough as a little kid. And then I somehow found my way to the trumpet, and then the trombone and the euphonium, and I became a brass player. And so I'm a brass player, which is perhaps a dirty secret. But I had played a violin and piano as a little kid, and I loved making music with people, and I loved I think the social part about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then in high school, I decided I wanted to teach, and so I went to school for education. And honestly, this is true. Actually, when I was listening to Philip Glass, all of high school, just driving around in my Toyota Camry, and just like listened to Einstein on the Beach until I couldn't take it anymore. And then I hadn't heard Beethoven until I got to college. And so I kind of learned about classical music, and in a way, kind of in reverse.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kind of got the conducting bug at some point in college. And then I realized, once I met other conductors, I was like, well, I'm not like these folks, but I don't know how. Probably because they started conducting when they were like 10.
Right.
At least if they were in Europe, they did.
Mm-hmm.
But also that I kind of felt like an art school kid. So as it's turned out, I've made this career where most of my work are collaborations in fields that are not necessarily in classical music.
Yeah,
right.
Which we're definitely here to hear more about. That's for sure. Janet, let's pop back to you for a second and talk about how your directorship of the Martha Graham Dance Company came about.
Wow, that's a checkered past. I danced with the company all through the 70s and as a guest artist in the 80s, and then went off and did some Broadway shows and some television shows as an actress. And after Martha's death, the company never really focused on who and what they were going to be after the loss of a genius, and fell into financial troubles and legal troubles. And in the 2002, the organization emerged victorious out of a couple of court cases that challenged her copyrights and the trademark of her name. And I was asked to organize our archives, which at that point were about 85 years of everything in the world, from sets to costumes to ballets, photos, scores, whatever. And I began our licensing business. And then in 2005, took over as artistic director, overseeing that business, what we called our resources, our archives and our licensing, the Martha Graham School, which is the oldest school of modern dance in the country, and the company, which is the oldest company of modern dance, of any kind of dance.
Was there any sort of plan at all in place for Martha's passing and what would come next? Or was it really just completely everything was caught off guard and you guys kind of had to pick up the pieces and decide where to go from there? In terms of there was no plan in place. Martha had a associate artistic director who was not a trained arts administrator or artist of any kind, and was just kind of running the company on a wing and a prayer. And there really wasn't any plan for it. And at the time, modern dance of the 20th century was just thought of as kind of old. It's just old stuff. Modern dance was all about the future. Every generation rejected what the past generation had done and moved into the future. So we had this body of work, our core collection, which really was undervalued. The whole field needed to think about what we were going to do with our past. So that kind of, when I took over as artistic director, that was kind of not only Martha Graham Dance Company was in the position of having to reflect on the value of our 20th century works, but the entire field really had to start valuing its past.
Right. Yeah, I'm very eager to get into the work both of you are doing together to, bring value to that very important past. But before we do, I'm kind of curious to hear, firstly, Chris, what your relationship to dance has been prior to this collaboration. And then Janet, what your relationship is to music. I mean, I think for dancers, it's quite rare that you would dance to silence. I mean, you always have some sort of rhythm. So music is almost inherently tied to dance, but of course, music can exist in many, many, many ways without dance. So let's have Chris go first.
I'm a terrible dancer. I'm absolutely awful. And weddings terrify me for the same reason. Though I guess I've been called a balletic conductor before. So I think there's certain types of conductors who, the other way to say it is over conducting. So some conductors are incredibly economical, and some, like me, move quite a lot. So certainly that word's been used, I guess.
Is that like a choice that you make, or is it just something that comes very naturally to you, and it just the music quite literally moves you?
Well, I'm sure I imagine it's similar for dancers, but at some point you stop thinking about the technique and you start acting, you just start existing, and the technique is always there, and I'm always like considering my occipital joint and considering how much tension, like considering how free and available my neck is, so that I'm not ruining my back and ruining my, traps, lats, and stuff. So I'm aware of the body, but when I'm thinking about the score, it's no longer technical. It's something where I just kind of like I'm trying to just be in it. And what that's meant is that I've kind of lost all of the things that my teacher taught me. My first teacher is Janet Carneiro, who's from Lisbon, and she conducts in this way that is totally swimming. She's always kind of doing the breaststroke, and I rarely use a baton, and she always does, but there's this kind of like lilting that she does with her arm. And the teacher I had right after her, who was also her teacher as well, a guy named Ken Kiesler. Ken is very clear, and it's all about clarity, and quite American. He's from the French kind of lineage, but it's quite this American style. So I've kind of somehow defaulted to my earliest training, and I've gotten kind of more, I'm swimming more as I age, I guess.
No, Chris is definitely dancing. We worked with Chris just back in October, and the dancers were watching him during a rehearsal, and he uses the same leverage off the floor that dancers does. I mean, his entire body is involved with the music and with transmitting the beat to, I don't know the term for this, Chris, to the orchestra, but it's totally leveraging the floor the way a dancer would.
That's great to hear that. And it's all physics and it's all breath.
Yeah.
I think like with the way that I'm a brass player, so I was many years ago. So I always think about breath, even for string players who of course are breathing as they take their attack as well. And so constantly I'm in that mode and using physics to do it.
Right.
I was just going to say, I bet Martha Graham dancers think about breath here and there, don't they?
Of course.
I was going to say, dance is the same thing. It's all physics and breath.
Yep. It's so similar.
Here we are. We're meeting in physics and breath.
So Chris, what was your first introduction to then conducting for dance?
Yeah, so in my senior recital in college, I said we should stage some pieces. And so we did an Appalachian Spring, in which there was it had nothing to do with the Graham choreography whatsoever. I think it was somebody someone else was rolled in a tarp and they carried them across the stage. It was I went to the dance department and I said who wants to make some work?
Yeah.
As one does. And I think it involved a funeral of every single one of my dancer friends at that, not an actual funeral, but on the stage. And I also, at my senior recital, we did Stravinsky's Octet, and there was a choreography for that as well. And then I hadn't conducted for dance for a long time. I did a show with Diavolo, dance company that's in Los Angeles, at the Soraya, which is also where I've collaborated with Martha Graham Dance Company and Janet over the last 5 or 6 years. And then after that, Thor, who runs the venue there, he said, "Hey, you should meet Janet, and we should talk about a project together." That's the beginning of our relationship.
Right. I wanted to know about that, to know how you came to know one another and then collaborate. But so let's rewind for a second and talk about this magnificent archive that the Graham Company has, this rich history. But Sandy was kind of a wake-up call when there was a lot of these wonderful archival costumes and footage and photos just completely lost. So what was your reaction to that loss, Janet, and how did you seek to kind of, I guess, prevent further loss and then bolster what was still around?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we should probably clarify. You're talking about Superstorm Sandy.
Yes.
Not just for anybody out there who doesn't know what Sandy did to us. We had all of our archives down in the basement of the building where we have our studios, and they were underwater for almost 2 weeks. So it was. I don't know where to begin. It was devastating. It was hard work. We were down there once they pumped enough water out of there. We were down there practically in hip waders and hazmat suits, pulling over 5,000 costumes out of the water. And fortunately, the Smithsonian and many other organizations around America sent conservator type people to New York to help us, to help the city government with the files that were underwater down at City Hall. And they said, just send those, they're wet already, just put them in the washing machine. And so we managed to salvage everything in order to copy it. If it wasn't wearable again, we could copy it.
Right.
Fortunately, our films and photos were on the second floor, so we didn't lose those important records of our work, but our Noguchi sets and all sorts of posters and software, equipment, theater equipment. So it was really devastating. But we did not miss a performance. We borrowed costumes from companies who had licensed our ballets and quickly loaned us things so we could put things together, and sort of got through that next year, and applied to FEMA grants and began reconstructing things as quickly as we could.
Wow. Oh my goodness. So when did you guys, let's go now to your collaboration. And now Thor has introduced you at the Soraya. You guys have initially met. What are your first conversations like? You've had this tremendous loss of records and some work, and maybe that's in your mind, Janet. What are you guys kind of talking about and thinking about how you can work together?
Chris, I think the first time we met, it wasn't really reflecting on our losses in terms of our musical scores. I think we worked together first in 2017, or it was several years after
or
Sandy.
perhaps even before that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that first coming together was just the thrill of working with you, Chris, with live music, and to have someone who is so simpatico to the idea that Martha Graham commissioned work for several decades. She only worked with new music, and she worked with some of the greats of the 20th century, not only Copland, but Hindemith and Menotti and Chavez and, Barber, it's a long list. So, and Chris, I mean, you can take it from there. He was just so attuned to what that really meant. So it was a thrill for me.
Yeah.
Well, the history of American, new music, and certainly 20th century new music, but gets completely intertwined with Martha Graham. And we owe her and the company, I think, like an incredible debt in giving us these remarkable pieces. And they're some of the most important American classical music, like full stop.
Right.
Yeah. And so we all, as classical musicians, we all grow up with that experience and with that knowledge. And then so to be able to engage with the company is like, at the feet of the guru. It's like, it's like, oh, here we are. This is like the promised land in a way. And this work.
And I think as we moved forward, and began working with each other almost every season, and Chris got to know our rep better, and I tried to mix up the rep so that audiences would have different experiences. I think, Chris, you began to realize more and more that our musical archives were teetering a bit. We needed new recordings. We needed better archival systems and
Right. And I think also I remember you and I had lunch during our first kind of time together, like our first week together. And you brought up the archive in that time. And there's like a lot of forethought. You said, well, our 100th anniversary is coming up soon. And that like we're thinking about our archives because of that and because of Sandy. And in a way, we started ideating about this archival work that we're now going to be so engaged in. We started thinking about that right away from the very first thing. So you had your eye on that. You're like, I see the future. It involves some new recordings and stuff.
Right.
Dimensions Dance Theater of Miami returns to the South Miami-Dade Cultural Arts Center's Lab Theater March 12th and 13th with another exciting salon program featuring an insider's glimpse at 5 works, all in different stages of progress, being prepared for premiere later this year. Their program spotlights the work of 4 cutting-edge neoclassical and contemporary choreographers with an insider's look at the process. This popular program of dance and discussion will be followed, as always, by an open floor question and answer opportunity for the audience. VIP tickets include a post-show cocktail reception with the artists following the Saturday, March 12th performance. If you're in the Miami area, get your tickets now. For tickets and more information, visit dimensionsdancemia.com or click the link in the description of this episode.
Can you tell us about some of the first major revivals that you worked on together? Like what were the reasons you chose these pieces? Was it because you thought they would be easy to salvage or because they were most at risk of being lost? Tell us about what that thought process was like from both of you.
I think it's a little bit of everything, right? I mean, some of the recordings we've been dancing to were probably made in the 70s.
Right.
Yeah, some have you can hear the record player, like you can hear that the record has a warp.
Right.
And some are the type of recording that basically there's one stereo microphone in the room and everybody aims at it.
Which of course is not the way it's done anymore.
Yeah. And so now, we're usually in recordings, we're engaged in certainly dozens and dozens of channels of microphones, and also some editing and all sorts of other stuff in almost every recording. So it's a much different kind of sound quality for sure. And there's something beautiful about that. You can hear the past and you can hear the technology of the past in those, but also if that clarinet is out of tune, like they're out of tune forever. and we couldn't like listen and go like, let's do another one.
Right.
Or what if like everyone do that and then clarinet don't, and you can play it 10 times afterwards and we'll just get the right.
Yeah. So in some cases, is this the only thing you have of this particular piece of music? Just one recording? Is there any sheet music? Like what is available to you when you're looking at something with an out of tune clarinet and the record going up and down?
Yeah, Jenny, you want to jump in?
No, you go ahead, because sheet music is there because music publishers are much more organized than dance companies.
Yeah,
that sounds right.
Mostly, although some, the thing we made during the pandemic was Immediate Tragedy, which was a solo from 1937, and there was a score from Henry Cowell, and there was the first and second page of the score, which were like a prelude and an interlude. And then the piece Immediate Tragedy was just lost. And I think you had the manuscript there at the offices, but only for the first and second page, and the piece itself was gone. And so I tried to channel Cowell, and I just wrote a new one. I mean, it's not Cowell, it's certainly me, but I knew what the key signature was. I knew what the meter was. And I kind of knew I know a bit about what his music sounds like. So certainly I tried to live in that space. Sure. But that was our first kind of making something brand new, that reviving something that was old.
Right. And what did you have of the dance for that work? Was there record of that?
One of the reasons we decided we could do a credible reinvention of it, I can't say it's a reconstruction, is that we recently discovered a large group of photos that were taken of Martha dancing the solo in 1937 from the front row. A guy was dating one of her dancers and was allowed to sit in the front row and snap photos of the entire performance. And Immediate Tragedy was on that program. So we not only had, 25 photos or so of it, we had the contact sheets and we knew what order they were in. so we could kind of see when the poses happened. You can never really know exactly what she did if there's no film, but it was inspiring enough that we thought, well, we've got to do something with this archival material.
Also, the top-down graph of the piece as well.
Yeah, somebody had made a SkyCam map of her staging pattern. Her production designer in Bennington in 1937 evidently watched a rehearsal or performance with his pencil on a piece of paper, and he just followed her pattern around the stage. And I found a photo of it in an old dance magazine. So we knew that she entered from upstage right. We knew she did a lot of diagonals. We knew there was a square in the middle of the stage. And she didn't exit. So we got some information off of that too.
Wow.
Right. So Janet, are you then responsible for filling in those blanks the way that Chris, composed an entirely new score in that vein?
Yeah, I did for Immediate Tragedy.
Right.
I decided to channel Martha as best I could.
That's so cool.
Yeah. I love that. I think this is like the work you're doing is so important. I can think of other instances where dance figures are treated a little too preciously, and then the pieces end up being lost entirely. And I just think like something like Martha's legacy, it's much more important to uplift it through these sorts of, the way that you're breathing new life into it. Like you said, we can't reconstruct it, but we can reinvent it and still pay homage to it and not lose it. And I think that's just so beautiful.
Yeah. We were talking with Chris offline before the interview, and we were talking about how sometimes it can feel scary for some organizations to try to reconstruct something when they don't have very much information. Maybe they think that it would be wrong to call it the exact thing. But I think you guys are not saying we created this solo again. You're saying it's a reinvention of it. So how are you kind of explaining that to audiences? How are you sharing that this is something different? Like you are trying to maintain what you can, but it's still not the very original, but it's the best that you can do.
We do program notes in the credit listings. We say choreographed in 1937 by Martha Graham, reimagined choreography by Janet Eilber. We've decided reimagined is really the right word.
Right.
Reconstruction or restaged makes it sound like it's really the real thing.
Right.
Things are not.
Yeah.
That's
great. Can you tell us about the project you're working on right now, which is is it a reimagining of the new Canticle of Comedians? How is this different from the last project? Like, do you have similar types of information, more or less?
No, it's completely different, Michael, because we're not trying to reimagine what Martha Graham did.
Right.
We're using her blueprint. We're just using the title and the idea for Canticle for Innocent Comedians, the work she did in 1952, which was her celebration of nature. And she created 8 vignettes for the stars of her company, titled Sun, Moon, Stars, Earth, Water, Wind. The last one was Death, Rebirth. And it was well received, considered to be magical. Paul Taylor said when he saw it as a student, it was the reason he became a choreographer.
Wow.
But there was no film except for the moon vignette. We have Martha Graham's choreography for the moon vignette, and we'll be using that. But we've, been commissioning new work for over 10 years now, and mostly experienced name choreographers. And we were sort of itching to work with some up and coming, the next generation, find a way to support them. So we decided to commission a different choreographer for each one of the vignettes. And we have a lead choreographer who is sort of bringing the whole thing together, giving it some cohesiveness, and that's Sonia Taya. She'll do the opening dance, the closing dance, and the interludes between these vignettes. We have Martha Graham's Moon Duet, and we have Michaela Taylor doing one, and the Aline sisters from the UK, Juliano Nunez, who's based in Germany, In Yue, the Chinese choreographer who's in New York, Jen Freeman, who's in New York. I'm hoping I'm not leaving anybody out, but it's And the wind vignette has been done by Sir Robert Cohan. He was the original dancer in Wind in 1952.
Wow.
And I asked him to create a new vignette for us, which he did in 2019.
Wow.
Fortunately, because he passed away just last year. So we've got one of his last pieces of choreography.
Wow.
So it's such an eclectic group of artists and creative types. With Chris's and Thor's recommendation from the Soraya, we reached out to Jason Moran, the wonderful jazz artist composer, and he's again in a cohesive move, creating one score for the whole thing. At one point, we even talked about having different composers for each vignette, but then we thought that would be too crazy. Sorry, it's a long story, but it's hard to describe that entire.
That's what we want to hear all about it. It's so fascinating. Yeah.
I want to go on a detour for a second, just because I'm curious. Chris, like in the music world, like can you think of instances where there are projects like this going on? Like, I don't know, is there a Tchaikovsky symphony laying in a Russian archive somewhere
I mean, certainly we have a lot of stories like that. Wild Up is the group that I run and I founded 12 years ago. And we're engaged in a big project of an American composer named Julius Eastman. And Eastman died in 1990. And it's a different story, but it's a similar story. Eastman his works are all polemics. They're really incredibly progressive. He was gay and black, and his works in the 70s all have really, really incredible titles, like gnarly titles, like the N-word is in a bunch of the titles. And he's like, these pieces are for any disenfranchised person. But he was evicted at his house in New York in 1982, the winter of 81-82. We don't know what month. And all the scores were thrown into the snow. But he had a practice of, and they're beautiful. They sound like Steve Reich and Philip Glass, and some are more modern, but some have this beautiful minimalism about them. So the scores many of them were lost. He made some archival recordings. So we have recordings, but not scores. And then we have some scores. He would write love notes to his friends. He would say, "For you," and he would write a note for them and give them the score. And so we have his scores just because he wrote these love notes on the scores and gave them to his friends.
Right.
So Wild Up is certainly we're like part of our work in terms of documenting the work is making archival recordings. It's a big part of our everything we're working on is in that recording area is archival.
Right.
So certainly, and Eastman is probably the most similar analog to this as well. Albeit much more recent actually. So just in the 80s and 90s.
And this was work that you were doing prior to meeting up with Janet, which is that why it made it such a simpatico relationship for you guys? Perhaps
so. Yeah, we started working on this project back in 2012, and then really in earnest in about 18. So we got the idea to like form it into something that looks like 7 years worth of anthology recordings. Right.
So what are you doing specifically on this project, the Canticle Project?
Yeah, so Wild Up's not in Canticle, but we're doing we're doing this like 100 minutes of music. We're making new recordings for Graham at the same time. So we're playing Chronicle and some other things on that program, on the program with Canticle.
The live performances, correct?
Live, and then we go into the studio, and we're in the studio for 2 weeks, and we make a ton of new recordings.
Wow.
And also it's going to be pretty thrilling to be, to have that, to be like, the tempo is this and it needs to be this. And also now finally we can have it be what it needs to be.
Right.
So cool.
In this moment, and of course we can fix all of the fidelity issues about the recordings in terms of the sound quality.
Quick question. Is Chronicle as hard to play as it is for the dancers to dance?
It's actually quite easy. It's
really?
I know. What we found is most of the moments where I'm like, let's do it. This is easy. Let's do it. Are all the moments that it's like the tempo must remain absolutely up and down.
Right.
And do not speed up because something is here that is incredibly, terrifyingly difficult.
Yeah.
For the dancers. So.
Oh my gosh, I love that work. It's then I saw Leslie the first time. That was the first time I ever saw it live, and Leslie was I just couldn't believe like how challenging it was, and she was so wonderful.
Yeah.
But it was so okay. Then this is another great subject, another path to go on is conducting for dance. I mean, are there moments where you're just like, you feel taken, like you want the music to take you a different direction, and you have to just,
admit it, Chris. Talk about Appalachian Spring. Talk about you want to do that opening slower.
I want that opening to just be like sunrise, and we just sat and watched every single minute of it, and it took as long as it took. Instead of like, no, the sun comes up and we're meeting the characters now. We have a few acts.
We got to move this around.
Let's get this show on the road, which is our, the job of a conductor is always negotiation. That's what the job is, like half therapy, half negotiation, and then a lot of like rehearsal planning.
Sure.
And like, did we bring all the drums for this, that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
And how are we going to use every single minute? Because, it's really tricky with musicians, our schedules are always too tight. Mm-hmm. So the negotiation part of it, I know it's the same way with dance. I can imagine it's the same way. It's like everybody, to get into the room, everyone has to be an Olympic athlete and be just an absolute A+ player. But what that means is, of course, as you get better and better and better and better, you get more self-sure and more self-sure.
And you have opinions down there, people with opinions.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
That doesn't happen in dance at all.
Yeah. And so we've got between 30 and 80 people, depending on what the show is. Usually for Graham stuff, it's about 30.
Sure.
We have 30 people in the pit, all with a different opinion about how something is going to go.
Right.
And I have to kind of negotiate so that we all agree on it.
Mm. And then you have the dancers needing something else.
And that's it. And then I'm like, I think it's this. And it's just not. It's just simply sometimes not that. And the dance always wins. And it doesn't mean that we don't push sometimes. We don't push back. And, Pierre Boulez, one of the great conductors and composers of the 20th century, Boulez always said, he would teach young students, he would say, when you speed up, contemplate slowing down. Mm. When you get louder, contemplate being softer. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. And you'll have a more metered and more beautiful kind of transition to those things. And I think this is what we get is I want to do the beginning of Appalachian Spring very slowly. And it's very simple. Like, it does need to just move.
Yeah.
And those two things in relationship to each other can create something that feels like that. Like when you're moving your arm in water, it has, mm-hmm. There's resistance between the two choices, what's needed and the choice that I can't make.
Right.
And that those two are in relationship. And the audience, of course, doesn't know that. But the players, they're playing with a different touch because of it. Mm-hmm. They can feel both. And I wonder if it's there on stage as well. Hopefully it's not ever too wrong that it causes a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's similar to what the dancers are going through in the opening, in Appalachian Spring, because they've got a very simple, slow walk. Hopefully not too slow, depending on Chris. But at the same time, the story of Appalachian Spring is about a wedding day. And in order to get everyone's motor going so that it's not lugubrious walking, we talk about the anticipation, that the characters are all coming into the scene with a great anticipation and excitement, even though they're simply walking about what's about to happen. So there's that two-sided thing that has to be there just to kick the whole thing off in the correct way.
Yeah.
Right. I was going to ask Chris, I staged a ballet at Indiana University, and we had two wonderful pianists that had never played for dance before. And every time I would say, like, just shave like a little bit of the tempo off, you get like half. Was there an adjustment? Yeah. Like to musicians, like, is there just an inherently like bigger range that you can play fast or slow, whereas the human body can only go so fast or slow?
For sure. I mean, we would sit, Janet and I often sit at a laptop, and we'll have a question. Janet will be giving me a note or something from the night before, and then we watch it on the video. We've not the night before, but from the archival. Mm-hmm. We'll watch it, and then I'll just clock it with my metronome right in front of us.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, so it's 88 here. Could we afford 86? Could I do 82? I know I can't do 60.
Uh-huh.
Right.
But so we have that we find the range,
right?
And then it's up to me to have the recall. to place it within the range. I think without that type of study and that type of going over and over the choice, it can, what happens with music, I've, at least as I found conducting, certain musics, they sit at 4 or 5 different tempi the right way. And so you get these kind of like little ledges where this could work in any of these 3 places, but you really can't work in a fraction less.
Right.
It has like a pocket, like there's this kind of middle section of Appalachian Spring. There's just one spot where like, wow, 144 really feels great.
Right.
And like, really, it can't be 144. And for other musicians, it's so easy at 144. It's very hard.
Right.
So there's that little difference, and they ever have this little bounce, and it's just so simple with their bow. And the other one is like quite specific, and it just engenders a different kind of playing. So it's convincing all the players that slower tempo, the touch can still be similar.
Ah, that's interesting.
I love that, because we had moments like doing complicated scores, at Miami City Ballet, we often danced to Stravinsky. And I remember one time the conductor told some dancers privately, because everyone was complaining, we want it faster. And he was just like, this, whatever instrument it was, just couldn't, that was very technically demanding for them. And so that was our turn to kind of scale back.
Right. That's funny. Yeah. I wonder, how often are you both referring to archival footage for the tempo? Like, Janet, do you at all think, Martha maybe did it this way, but maybe we could speed this section up? I would like to see that. Or do you really try to stay true to her intentions?
There's a couple of different answers to that. We try to stay true to her intentions. However, her intentions, she created things until she was 96 years old. So she often made changes and adjustments in the course of her long career. Certainly the facility of dancers changed every decade. And she loved that. And when incorporate, they could move faster, they could jump higher. So there were many adjustments. But there are other things, like, again, back to our recordings, Diversion of Angels, for example. When I danced it, there are 3 different couples in Diversion of Angels. The couple in yellow, kind of sprightly teenagers, couple in red, more lyrical, passionate, and the couple in white. And I was always the woman in white. And that role was the slower, more mature, not in a rush role. And when I came back as artistic director, we were using a recording that did not really accentuate the difference in these 3 couples.
Right.
And particularly the white couple is dancing much too fast in our current production. In our current production, we've been dancing too fast for 20, 25 years with that recording that wasn't really right, but it was a good recording, and they decided they had to use it. The other one was degraded or whatever.
Right.
So it's going to be my great pleasure to go into the recording studio with Chris and restore that original tempo for the white couple in particular, because it's essential, really, I believe, to really the poetry of the work.
Yeah, I really love that. I wonder too, Janet, what you will be doing. You mentioned you're going to be in the recording studio, and obviously this has been such a collaborative process the whole time. So tell us what that collaboration will look like in the recording studio, because I think maybe people might not appreciate what a big deal it is for you guys to have this opportunity to have musicians playing exactly what you want so that you can use this beautiful, high quality recording.
Yeah, I think, Chris and I have kind of had a mind meld over the years we've been working together, and I don't want to ask him for anything that destroys the musicality of a piece. And he wants to make it work for the dancing. So we'll be working that out in the recording studio.
Right.
It's an incredibly rare opportunity to do this, and it's a huge undertaking, and it's tons and tons of hours, and just lots of, the way we prep for a recording is not the way we prep for something live.
How's it different?
Well, musicians are obsessed with things that are permanent.
Oh, I bet. I'm sure.
And the energy. I mean, Wild Up is an ensemble that loves to improvise and stuff, and we love to just be like, this is today, go. But when we go into the studio, it is a different thing. And everybody, you see everyone kind of gets they have their zone, and they have their water bottle the right way, and they have their tea, and they're kind of like, okay, there's like this different energy that is like quite ferocious. And it's ferocious about being perfect forever.
Right.
And it's a different thing. And so, of course, then it's my goal to be like, okay, no, this has to be perfect just the once.
Yeah.
And also we has to be perfect here in the heart as well. If we just get it perfect on our instrument, like we're not in good shape.
Right.
Like that's because we won't feel it. So it's a cool thing, but it's very, very detail oriented. You have to build extra time. So we've done that. And then kind of we prep everything, get it to the place, and we kind of present it in a similar way that we would for a show. We get everything ready, we do it once, and then Janet's like, I have these 15 notes, this.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But as we know it's going to be kind of permanent, it's a different thing. And I think the notes have to be a little more specific. Also, I have to do a lot of prep work to figure out where all the edits are. So if we like one version of one section, we can get that one version.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a collage part of the work.
Sure. I was going to ask that actually, because speaking of permanency, it makes me think of, Michael, we did a few, not nearly as many as the dancers used to do in generations before us, but like a TV, a PBS special when we were at Miami City Ballet, and just the amount of takes and, and it is that permanency, like where we would normally just like do the ballet and be done and walk off stage, it was just so different. So I can imagine it's quite similar, and finding where they can do the cuts, like you mentioned as well.
Precisely. Yeah. It's a different, I think it's a different kind of a thought process.
A different beast.
Yeah. And still so many of the best recordings ever are all in one take. So there's that thing of like, how do we build something that works and is totally cohesive and feels as if it is one arc? When perhaps it could be, in some cases people are doing one bar at a time. We're not going to do that.
Right.
But there are some pieces of new music where it's so challenging that everyone's like, okay, let's just do that one bar. It's just death defying. Let's just get it. And they just drop it in. They do the one bar.
Wow. So, doesn't seem fair somehow.
It is not fair, but you can hear it. You can hear it.
I would bet. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of our recordings we've been doing, we'll do one big take of something, and then we'll find all of the one bars to drop in after. So we're like, we nailed it. We put in this one note. Great, done.
Right.
Right. And which is tricky, but it can work. So
right. So how many works are you all recording together?
Maybe 8.
Have I? Yeah, that sounds right. I don't think I've counted.
Yeah, 7 or 8.
And they
quite a few.
Yeah.
They run the gamut from really early stuff by Louis Horst, like Frontier, the solo she did in 1935. We're also doing Lamentation, which is not Louis Horst, that's Kodai. 2 Diversion of Angels in 48, and Chronicle is 30. So it's a range. And Chronicle has, I don't know how many players, Chris, but
Chronicle's just in the low 30s. So it's Chronicle's the biggest group,
biggest.
And we have things that are down to chamber.
And these are such important hallmarks of your repertoire.
Right.
So no matter where our listeners are, it's possible that the next time they see the Graham Company, they're going to be hearing this recording. So cool.
That's the plan.
Yeah.
The sooner the better.
It's just been so fascinating. But I'm wondering, before we wrap up, is there a dream project, maybe an idea, Janet, you have of a work that you would like to bring Chris's expertise into, like the next big Graham reimagining?
Chris, should we talk about it?
Yeah.
Have
I think
one
this
planned.
is like spoiler alert.
Yes.
Spoiler alert.
We love
Go ahead.
Exclusive.
Well, we are talking about, Martha only did one full evening length work, and it's Clytemnestra. It's the Trojan War, all the characters, Agamemnon, Electra, Cassandra, the works. And it's renowned as a dance, but we really think that it's got potential to be turned into an opera and to borrow elements of Graham's choreography, borrow elements of the Noguchi set, possibly elements of the score. We're not sure exactly how much we'd like to mess with it. Well, we know we'd like to mess with it a lot, but we want to put together a creative team that will take whatever elements they think will work well into creating the contemporary opera out of Martha Graham's work.
Yeah. And that's the whole other part of my life is that I do a lot of opera and a lot of new American opera. I'm music director at Long Beach Opera here, which is like the longest running opera company in Southern California, and also has been doing experimental work for its entire history.
Right.
So this is, we'll see if it ends up at Long Beach actually, but certainly that's a huge passion of mine.
Right.
Wow. So is this just like a dream project, or like maybe wheels are in motion, or maybe we can't say?
A few conversations have happened, and we've got, certainly my colleague, James Dara at Long Beach, who's a brilliant American director, lives in Los Angeles, is interested. So we'll see if James takes it on. And we have, it's in conversation.
Right.
And there's that big anniversary coming up, so I feel like a big piece is appropriate.
Oh, I love that.
Our 100th is in 2026. So we're hoping that in the next 4 years we can make this happen.
Well, we'll have to have you guys back on to talk about it if that comes to fruition. That sounds fascinating.
Sounds incredible.
And I'm sure there'll be so much to talk about. So thank you guys so much. This was so wonderful. We wish we could be there to see it, but we know that our listeners in LA will definitely get their tickets, go to the Soraya, see this. Oh, what else is on the program other than Canticle, Janet?
We're opening with Lamentation. We decided to do everything that was, well, not everything, but do 3 pieces that are going to be recorded. So we're opening with 1930 Lamentation. We're going to Chronicle, which is 1936, Intermission, and then the new Canticle.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Well, we wish you guys the best. We know it's going to be wonderful and the audiences will love it.
Thank you both for joining us.
So much.
Great.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks for having us.